In 2001, Capcom released Devil May Cry, developed by one of their studios named Team Little Devils, and was under the direction of Hideki Kamiya. Initially planned as a Resident Evil sequel, it became a surprise hit for the Japanese company and gave birth to a new genre, which other games have materialized following afterwards. Consequently, a second installment was in order, but this time around, Capcom assigned a different studio to handle production, with a director unknown to this day. However, during development, the company didn't like what they saw, so the original director got fired to be replaced by Hideaki Itsuno, known for his work on Street Fighter Alpha, Star Gladiator and One Piece Mansion to name a few. Still, a follow-up to a well-praised game was exciting, which is unfortunate then. Devil May Cry 2 became the antithesis of its predecessor, and even today makes you wish Kamiya and his team still had the responsibility.
Good grief. They really made a big mess, didn't they?
Following the events of the first game, Dante returns to eliminate demons, who was also now joined by second playable character, Lucia. After their brief meeting, they soon come across Mattia, the last guardian of the Vidimali clan, who once fought alongside Sparta. She informs both that Aureus has made the land fiend infested and planning to open the portal to the demon world to summon Argosax, as well as pursue immortality. As monsters occupy territory and Aureus still at large, Dante and Lucia must overcome the Horde and stop the antagonist's ambitions. From the start, DMC2's combat is far from what made the first game exciting. For one, performing combos requires directional inputs with the left analog stick. The problem is, the lock-on mechanic renders this method of attack useless, given that Dante's stinger and launcher are also dependent on this feature. Also, executing different combos is superfluous because DMC2 doesn't penalise repetition. In Devil May Cry, a single button controlled Dante's combos, and which one he performed, depending on how long the delay was for the third input. Despite the simplicity, it's user-friendly and incentivizes to alter between moves, as this affects your stylish ranking, thus determining how many red orbs you'll get. Furthermore, finishing levels quickly unharmed contributes to their quantity, so you can improve Dante's HP, Devil Trigger and unlock new moves, thus expanding his repertoire. These systems link with one another, and mastering them was not only gratifying, but necessary for getting the most out of your experience. Unfortunately, DMC2 doesn't encourage the same approach due to the game's shoddy design. The balancing is appalling, and the upgrade system is lame since weaponry only boosts DPS. By the way, all melee weapons are swords and all have the same moveset. Although there are differences in their range and damage, these are minuscule as which one you buff becomes a matter of preference, assuming you even care. Because for some reason, firearms are too strong and made worse by they too being upgradable. And if that wasn't bad enough, they can juggle enemies from sustained fire, therefore launching foes with your sword is unnecessary. As such, many clashes result from standing in place while spamming the fire button, so much so you don't have to pay attention, bearing in mind Dante will lock towards the closest adversary, even from off screen. Admittedly, Devil May Cry didn't have any means from altering from foe to foe, though it sort of offsets this with enemies having audio cues, allowing our white-haired hero to react and reposition himself. In DMC2, pressing the left analog stick switches targets, theoretically making combat encounters easier to manage. Sadly, the mechanic doesn't function, making manual threat prioritization impossible, and even extends towards several bosses. Regardless of how you deal with it, enemy AI is dreadful to the point you can ignore them for the most part, not to mention the adversaries you engage are uninspired. Boss fights are just as bad because many incentivize firearm use, and in some cases, they're abusable. One level has you fight tanks and a helicopter in a Devil May Cry game. The former are powerless at point blank, given they have no countermeasures, and their barrel can't go low enough to shoot you, while the helicopter chases Dante to the top of a building, giving the impression you must fight it during this sequence. In actuality, reaching the final spot is all that's required, then it's a matter of shooting the vehicle with Dante's overpowered guns. The only decent bosses are those at the end of both campaigns, but that's because they force you to battle them properly instead of exploiting them. If only the others were the same, instead of being tedious, frustrating, and falling to cheap tactics. One thing I didn't touch upon was how dodging functioned in the previous game. In Devil May Cry, pulling off a successful dodge was determined by the timing of their strike and being locked on with the enemy. Depending on Dante's position, you would then press the jump button whilst moving the left analog stick in a chosen direction. It was an easy system to grasp, despite some suspect conditions inhibiting your performance. In DMC2, the circle button operates the dodge move, so locking on is an essential. However, given its massive levels, as well as Dante's and Lucia's base speed, you'll find yourself abusing this mechanic far more than needed. Increasing the running pace could have resolved this, although such changes can have other side effects. Dante isn't the only character. Lucia is also playable with her levels, though she suffers from the same issues, a combat system that's unbalanced and underwhelming. Lucia has a shorter campaign, but most stages recycle Dante's with a few exceptions. Her swimming levels are in third person, though these don't mount much with the lackluster combat. Like in Devil May Cry, Devil Trigger buffs attacks, regenerates HP, and assaulting enemies refills it. The issue is the developers, for whatever purpose, decided to make Dante's too strong. If his health is critical, deploying DT makes him invincible and boosts his DPS to a ridiculous level, making bosses even more of a joke. It's also worth pointing out the first game had moves attached to Devil Trigger, and once active, those attacks opened up new ways for being stylish. Moreover, taunting enemies regains DT and complements Dante's persona. DMC2's Devil Trigger does retain the passive benefits, but it is now customizable, each amulet providing specific traits, though having combat moves tied to these could have made this feature more compelling, plus you can't taunt foes. Furthermore, you have to find them, which is unexciting because of the appalling level design, and once found, pausing the game is mandatory to equip them, bringing the pacing to a halt. Switching weapons in the first game also broke the flow of combat, whereas here, the devs' attempt to resolve this is underdeveloped. Both can select ranged weapons in real time, though they can't do this with swords. Simply put, DMC2's gameplay is a step back, even with its new mechanics, which are either half-baked or overshadowed by its troubles. Environments feel hollow and bland to explore, never mind fighting, and it doesn't help the map in the pause menu doesn't reveal where your avatar is and their objective. For this reason, there were situations where I got stuck, not to mention many don't have plot relevance. Devil May Cry also had levels that weren't plot relevant, but they also had interactivity, as Dante would give his inner thought to what he was investigating, and it was the game's way for adding world building. DMC2 doesn't have this. Sure, there are red orbs and other items within specific places, but since the gameplay is too easy, they're not worth pursuing, and one area has some incongruous textures you'll see in a video game. As for the camera, it's a case of taking one step forward and 3 steps back. While it doesn't change perspectives frequently because of the sizable locales, there were circumstances where it gets too close, obscuring enemies and worsening the need to abuse your firearms. In terms of replay value, you maintain upgrades after initial playthroughs, but beating Dante's campaign on hard mode unlocks Trish, and her controls perform like they were in Devil May Cry, which are superlative. However, just because you plays better than Dante and Lucia combined doesn't mean the game becomes good. If anything, it makes you question why they didn't stick with the original controls. Besides, you still have to deal with the other subpar elements, and Dante's campaign needs beating on normal before hard mode is available. That is, you even bother doing so, when Lucia's campaign will likely take precedence in light of viewing her side of the narrative. DMC2 is the first game to introduce Bloody Palace, a mode where you go through thousands of floors whilst the difficulty escalates. In hindsight, this mode is pointless. The same is true for its secret levels, another feature I didn't talk about from my Devil May Cry review. Here you're just eliminating waves of opponents, whereas the first installment tested players in different ways. DMC2 does have a story, and in short, it's forgettable. Many have addressed Dante's personality shift and why they believe he isn't enthralling, but since he killed his brainwashed brother Virgil, it's understandable why some of his charm would recede. The problem is DMC2's Dante is humdrum, lacking the energy and characterization to warrant his existence. There is a subplot where Mattia would tell him more about Sparta, but leads to nothing when Dante later reveals he already knows the tale, making you wonder why the writers even contemplated its inclusion. It's just as trivial as to why Dante would flip a coin when slaying demons is his profession, and let's not forget there's a madman who envies being a god. Ironically, despite being on the box art, Lucia is indeed the main character, and unlike Dante, she has story purpose. When Lucia meets Aureus, he reveals she was his creation who discarded her, Mattia was her adopted mother, and eventually Lucia will turn against humanity. It's an improvement over Dante's, however the character lacks personality and doesn't leave a lasting impression. Mattia only serves to give exposition as well as dire warning, and as for Aureus, well, he's an awful antagonist with comical line delivery in the final act, in addition to not doing anything proactively in terms of pursuing his objective. In fact, in one scene, Dante brings the Arcanas to Aureus, so his intentions become a reality. Yes, Dante stops the ritual by switching the medallion with his coin, yet it still somehow opens the portal despite being incomplete. DMC2's story has suspect characterization and gets confusing the more you scrutinize. The opening is less effective in establishing the plot and characters, notably Lucia dipping out after requesting Dante's help. Then it cuts to him on top of a clock tower, fixated on his destination before jumping off. The endings aren't as thrilling compared to their predecessor and are no longer than a minute. Voice acting is a mixed bag, but the sound design is solid, as is the score, notwithstanding the fact a different team composed it. Like with Devil May Cry from the HD collection, the visuals look sharp with their upscaling, including the in-game cutscenes, and the FMVs this time around are less pixelated. Sadly, DMC2 doesn't feature any way of disabling subtitles, and while it's minor compared with all of its imperfections, having the option would have been beneficial. Overall, Devil May Cry 2 is an awful game, let alone a sequel. Combat is too easy, levels lack character, and these, among many others, are stitched with a lackluster story. Luckily, despite the criticism, the game was commercially successful, and as such, a third entry was on the cards, which would be responsible for putting the IP back on course. Though it cannot be understated, this was, and still is, the black sheep of the series, especially after learning its troubled development. You may not be in hell by playing this game, but Devil May Cry 2 sure feels like it.